The courthouse of Redemption Creek stood like a weathered tombstone against the August sky, its wooden walls bleached pale by decades of unforgiving sun. Inside, the air hung thick with sweat, tobacco smoke, and the peculiar tension that comes when a community gathers to witness someone's fate being decided by men who've never walked in their boots. Evelyn Monroe stood before Judge Cornelius Blackwood, her chin lifted despite the tremor in her hands. At 23, she possessed the kind of beauty that made decent women whisper behind their fans and men tip their hats a little too eagerly. Her auburn hair, usually pinned in perfect propriety, had come loose in the heat, sending rebellious curls down her neck. She wore her best dress, a deep blue cotton that had belonged to her mother, though it seemed a mockery now, dressed for church while standing trial for survival. "Miss Monroe." Judge Blackwood's voice rolled through the courtroom like distant thunder. "You stand accused of operating an establishment of questionable morality." A ripple of self-righteous murmurs swept through the packed benches. Evelyn's jaw tightened. The establishment had been nothing more than her late father's house, where she'd taken in washing and mending to keep from starving. But when Margaret Willoughby claimed she'd seen men coming and going at unseemly hours delivering laundry, though Margaret conveniently forgot that detail, the rumors had sprouted like prairie grass after rain. "Your father, God rest his soul, was a respected member of this community," Blackwood continued, his gray beard wagging with each word. "It pains me to see his only daughter fallen so far from grace." Evelyn's fingernails bit into her palms. Her father had been respected. All right, respected enough that nobody mentioned his gambling debts or the mortgage he'd drunk away. After his death 6 months ago, she'd discovered the truth: the house was gone, the savings non-existent, and his reputation was all that stood between her and the streets. However, Blackwood raised a hand to quiet the crowd. "This court believes in redemption, Miss Monroe. You have two choices." His pale eyes glinted with the satisfaction of a man who enjoyed playing God. "You can accept a sentence of 18 months at the Yuma Women's Reformatory." The crowd gasped. Yuma was a death sentence wrapped in the pretense of moral correction. Women went in young and came out broken, if they came out at all. Or, Blackwood continued, savoring the moment, "You can choose the protection of holy matrimony. Any man in good standing who'll have you may claim you as his bride, here and now." The courtroom erupted. Women clutched their pearls. Men shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Evelyn felt the room spin slightly, the heat and humiliation making her stomach churn. Marriage to a stranger or imprisonment neither was a choice, merely different cages. "She can marry my cousin Josiah," called out Henrietta Pruitt, a pinch-faced woman who'd led the campaign against Evelyn. "He needs a wife, and Lord knows he ain't particular." Bitter laughter threatened to escape Evelyn's throat. Josiah Pruitt was 60 if he was a day, with wandering hands and breath that could peel paint. She'd rather take her chances with the Scorpions in Yuma. "Anyone else?" Blackwood asked, scanning the crowd with theatrical patience. The silence stretched like taffy. The eligible bachelors, all three of them, suddenly found the floor fascinating. The married men wouldn't meet her eyes. Even those who'd tipped their hats yesterday now treated her like she carried the plague. Evelyn's gaze swept the courtroom, pride warring with desperation. Near the back, separated from the respectable folk by iron bars and 2 armed deputies, sat the prisoners awaiting transport. Most were petty thieves and drunks who'd served their time in the county lockup. But one man sat apart, chains at his wrists and ankles, scheduled for the gallows come Sunday. Luke Callahan. She'd heard the stories. Of course, everyone had. Train robber. They said killer. They whispered, the kind of outlaw that mothers used to frighten children into obedience. But as their eyes met across the crowded courtroom, Evelyn saw something the gossips had missed, a flicker of understanding in those storm-gray eyes, the recognition of one trapped soul to another. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that would have been handsome if not for the scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his jaw. He sat with the easy grace of a man comfortable with danger, as if the chains were merely an inconvenience rather than a prelude to death. An absurd thought struck her. What was one more scandal to a dead woman walking? "I choose him," Evelyn heard herself say, pointing to the condemned man. The courtroom exploded. Women shrieked. Men jumped to their feet. Judge Blackwood's gavel cracked against wood repeatedly, demanding order. "You can't be serious," Blackwood roared when the chaos finally subsided. "That man is sentenced to hang." "You said any man who'd have me," Evelyn replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "You didn't specify he had to have a future." Luke Callahan had straightened in his seat, studying her with an expression caught between amusement and disbelief. When Deputy Collins prodded him with a rifle butt, he spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a trace of Tennessee drawl. "The lady's got sand. I'll give her that." He tilted his head, considering. "Though I'm not sure marrying a dead man improves her situation much." "Let her have him," someone shouted from the crowd. "They deserve each other." "Shameful," cried another. "Her poor father's rolling in his grave." Judge Blackwood's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. This wasn't how his little morality play was supposed to unfold. He'd expected tears, pleas, perhaps gratitude when some upstanding citizen finally took pity on her. Not this mockery of justice. "Mr. Callahan," he ground out, "do you accept this woman's proposal?" Luke's gaze never left Evelyn's face. She met it squarely, lifting her chin another notch. Let them all see she wouldn't grovel, wouldn't beg, wouldn't play the repentant fallen woman they wanted her to be. "Well now," Luke said slowly, "I was planning on spending my last days contemplating my sins, but I suppose matrimony's its own kind of penance." A ghost of a smile touched his scarred face. "I accept." "This is insanity." Blackwood slammed his gavel again. "I won't allow—" "Your Honor," interrupted Jeremiah Crawford, the town's only lawyer, rising from his seat. "With all due respect, you made the terms clear. Any man in good standing who'd have her. You didn't say he had to be a free man, just a man, and until Sunday, Mr. Callahan remains a living citizen with the rights thereof." The judge's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. The crowd buzzed with excited horror. This would be talked about for years, how Judge Monroe's daughter chose death over dishonor, or perhaps chose dishonor over hypocrisy. "Fine," Blackwood spat. "If you want to bind yourself to a murderer, Miss Monroe, so be it. Deputy, bring the prisoner forward." The chains clanked as Luke stood, moving with that same dangerous grace, despite the shackles. Up close, Evelyn could see the bruises from his capture, the weariness beneath the defiance, but his eyes remained steady, almost gentle, as he looked down at her. "You sure about this, miss?" he asked quietly, for her ears alone. "There's no taking it back. I stopped being sure about anything the day they put me in this box," she replied just as softly. "At least this cage is one I chose myself." Something flickered in his eyes, respect, perhaps, or recognition. "Fair enough." The ceremony was a grotesque parody of sacred vows. No flowers, no music, just the scratching of the clerk's pen and the weight of 100 judging stares. When the preacher asked if anyone objected, the entire room seemed to inhale, but no one spoke. They were all too busy savoring the spectacle. "Do you, Evelyn Marie Monroe, take this man," the preacher swallowed hard, "to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." The words tasted like ash and liberation. "Do you, Luke Benjamin Callahan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His voice carried a note of something that might have been humor. "For all 3 days of it." "Then, by the power vested in me." The preacher rushed through the final words as if they burned his tongue. I pronounce you man and wife." No one suggested they kiss. The very idea seemed to horrify the crowd into momentary silence. Well, Judge Blackwood recovered his composure with visible effort. "It seems congratulations are in order. Mrs. Callahan." The name dripped with venom. "You've made your choice. Now you can live with it however briefly." The crowd parted like the Red Sea as the deputies prepared to return Luke to his cell. But Evelyn stepped forward, her new husband's chains rattling between them. "Where he goes, I go," she announced. "Those are the vows we just took. Aren't they for better or worse?" "You can't stay in the jail," Blackwood blustered. "Then release him to my custody, after all." She smiled sweetly, the expression sharp as broken glass. What harm can a condemned man do in 3 days, unless you think your deputies can't track down a man in chains? The murmuring grew louder. This wasn't just scandal anymore. This was defiance, the kind that could spread like wildfire through a town built on order and obedience. "Your Honor." Crawford spoke up again, clearly enjoying himself. "There is precedent. The Hutchinson case of '76. A condemned man was released to his wife's custody for his final days." Blackwood looked like he'd swallowed a lemon whole. "Fine. Deputy Collins, strike the prisoner's chains. He's to remain in Mrs. Callahan's custody until his appointment with the rope. One step out of line, and she hangs beside him." The threats washed over Evelyn like water. What did it matter? She was already dead in their eyes. Had been since the first whisper of impropriety. At least now she'd chosen her own executioner. The chains fell away with a clatter that echoed through the silent courtroom. Luke rubbed his wrists, the gesture bringing attention to hands that looked equally capable of violence or gentleness. When he offered her his arm, a mockery of gentlemanly courtesy that made several women gasp, Evelyn took it without hesitation. "Shall we, Mrs. Callahan?" He said her new name like it was a private joke between them. "We shall, Mr. Callahan." They walked from the courthouse into the blazing afternoon sun, past the gaping faces and pointing fingers, past the whispers that followed like tumbleweeds. Neither looked back. There was nothing there worth seeing anyway. The last thing Evelyn heard as they stepped into the dusty street was Judge Blackwood's voice, pitched to carry, "3 days, Mrs. Callahan. Make your peace with God." She squeezed Luke's arm slightly, surprised to feel solid muscle beneath the worn fabric. "I'd rather make my peace with the devil I chose than the saints who condemned me." His laugh was rusty, as if he'd forgotten how. "Darlin', you may have just done both." The wedding ceremony, if it could be called that, took place in the same courthouse an hour later. Word had spread through Redemption Creek like wildfire, and even more spectators crammed into the sweltering room to witness the scandal of the century. Women who hadn't darkened the courthouse door in years suddenly discovered urgent business there, their fans fluttering like agitated butterflies. Reverend Josiah Whitmore performed the ceremony with the enthusiasm of a man conducting his own funeral. His hands shook as he held the worn Bible, and he refused to meet either of their eyes. The marriage certificate, a hasty document that the clerk had prepared with obvious reluctance, lay on the judge's bench like an accusation. "Dearly beloved," the Reverend began, then caught himself. Nothing about this gathering was beloved. He cleared his throat and continued in a monotone. "We are gathered here to witness the union of Evelyn Marie Monroe and Luke Benjamin Callahan in holy matrimony." Someone in the back snorted at the word holy. Another woman loudly whispered that she'd need to burn sage in the courthouse after this blasphemy. Luke stood straight despite what must have been days of confinement, his wrists still bearing the raw marks of shackles. He'd attempted to smooth down his dark hair, but it remained stubbornly wild. Like the man himself, his clothes, the same ones he'd been arrested in, were travel-worn and dusty, a stark contrast to Evelyn's careful blue dress. "Have you the ring?" Reverend Whitmore asked, knowing full well the answer. "Must have left it in my other cell," Luke replied dryly. Evelyn surprised herself by almost smiling. She pulled off her mother's thin gold band, the last valuable thing she owned, and handed it to him. "This will do." Luke studied the ring, then her face. "You sure this looks like it means something?" "Everything meant something once," she said quietly. "Now it can mean something new." When he slipped the ring back onto her finger, the wrong hand. She noticed, but didn't correct him. His touch was surprisingly gentle. His hands were calloused and scarred, hands that had known hard work before they'd known crime. "I now pronounce you man and wife." The Reverend rushed through the final words. "What God has joined, let no man put asunder." He snapped the Bible shut. "May he have mercy on your souls." "Bit late for that, Reverend," Luke observed. The documents were signed and witnessed with indecent haste. Judge Blackwood himself served as one witness, his signature slashed across the page like an angry wound. Mrs. Prudence Morrison, the banker's wife, signed as the second witness with theatrical reluctance, making sure everyone saw how her hand trembled with moral distress. "There," Blackwood growled, shoving the certificate at Evelyn. "Your marriage is legal. God help us all. Deputy Collins will escort you to collect your belongings. Then to the edge of town. You have 3 days. Callahan, Sunday at dawn. You hang, try to run, and we'll hunt you both down like dogs." "Charming wedding toast," Luke murmured. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun struck like a physical blow. The crowd followed them into the street, maintaining a safe distance as if sin might be contagious. Children were yanked back by their mothers when they ventured too close. Men spat in the dust as they passed. Evelyn's small rented room sat above the milliner's shop, or it had been hers until this morning. Mrs. Abernathy, the milliner, stood in the doorway with Evelyn's possessions already packed in 2 battered carpet bags. "I won't have the wife of a murderer living above my establishment," she announced loudly enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "Your things are all there. I've counted the spoons." "How Christian of you, Mrs. Abernathy," Evelyn replied, taking the bags. "I'll be sure to mention your kindness when I'm saying my prayers." The woman flushed red. "Don't you dare speak of prayer, you shameless—" "Ma'am," Luke interrupted quietly. "I believe my wife and I have some traveling to do." The possessive word wife seemed to shock everyone, including Evelyn. He took the heavier bag from her hand without asking, a casual courtesy that felt strange after the morning's brutality. They walked to the livery stable, where Samuel Carter, the hostler, had already prepared the broken-down wagon that served as the town's prisoner transport. It was hardly a wedding carriage, boards warped from sun and rain, wheels that squeaked like dying mice, pulled by a sway-backed mare that looked ready for the glue factory. "This is what they're giving us," Evelyn asked Deputy Collins. "Be grateful you're getting anything," he replied. Though he had the grace to look uncomfortable, he'd known her father, had tipped his hat to her just last week. "There's a cabin about 15 miles north, near Sulphur Springs, abandoned, but it's got 4 walls and a roof. You can—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "You can wait there to become a widow." Luke helped her onto the wagon seat with the same surprising gentleness he'd shown with the ring. The crowd parted as they rolled down Main Street, past the general store where Evelyn had bought flour just yesterday, past the church where she'd attended services since childhood, past the cemetery where her parents lay. Each familiar sight felt like a goodbye. At the town's edge, Deputy Collins stopped them one last time, Sunday morning. He reminded them unnecessarily. "Don't make me come looking." "Wouldn't dream of it, Deputy." Luke replied, "I'm a man of my word, even if it's the word of a condemned man." As Redemption Creek disappeared behind them in a cloud of dust, Evelyn finally felt the full weight of what she'd done. She was now Mrs. Luke Callahan, wife of an outlaw, heading into the wilderness with a man she didn't know, whose hands had taken lives. Who would hang in 3 days' time? The silence stretched between them like the empty road ahead. The mare plodded along, seemingly unbothered by the drama of her passengers. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals in lazy spirals. The landscape gradually shifted from the civilized outskirts of town to the wild country beyond sage and mesquite, red rock and endless sky. "Why?" Luke asked finally, his voice carrying over the wagon's squeaks. "Why what?" "Why choose me? You could have taken Josiah Pruitt's offer. He's old and grabbly, but he's not bound for a noose." Evelyn considered her answer. "When they gave me those choices, they weren't really giving me choices at all. They were telling me my life was over just picking the method of execution. Reformatory, loveless marriage to a man who'd use me like property, or," she gestured vaguely at him, "or marriage to an actual condemned man. At least you're honest about what you are." She adjusted her bonnet against the sun. "Josiah Pruitt would smile in church on Sundays while making my life miserable every other day. You'll be gone in 3 days. Seems like the better bargain." He made a sound that might have been a laugh. Most women don't comparison shop for husbands based on how quickly they'll be widowed. "I'm learning that I'm not most women." They rode in silence for another mile before Luke spoke again. "That Judge Blackwood, he had it out for you particularly. This wasn't just about moral propriety." Evelyn's hands tightened on her worn gloves. "He proposed to my mother once, before she married my father. She chose a simple lawyer over a man with ambitions. He never forgave her for it, or my father for winning her, with both of them gone." She shrugged. "I became a convenient target for old grudges. So he destroyed your life over a 30-year-old rejection. Men have destroyed more for less." Luke couldn't argue with that. The cabin, when they finally reached it, was a generous description for what appeared to be a losing argument between lumber and gravity. The walls leaned at concerning angles, the roof had more holes than shingles, and the door hung on one hinge like a broken tooth. A rusty pump stood guard beside a well that might or might not contain water. "Home, sweet home," Luke said, pulling the mare to a stop. Evelyn surveyed their temporary dwelling. "It's perfect." He glanced at her, surprised. "You've got strange standards, Mrs. Callahan." "It's honest," she said, climbing down from the wagon without waiting for his help. "It doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is, a place to exist for 3 days. They unloaded her meager possessions in silence. 2 bags that contained the remnants of a lifesome clothes, her mother's Bible, a daguerreotype of her parents, a few precious books, and the small amount of money she'd hidden from the creditors. Luke carried them inside while she tested the pump. After several groaning attempts, it produced a trickle of rust-colored water that gradually ran clearer. Inside, the cabin was one room with a fireplace that had become home to a family of mice, a table with 3 legs, and a bed frame strung with rope that had mostly rotted through. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight streaming through the holes in the roof. "I can sleep outside," Luke offered, studying the single bed frame. "Don't be ridiculous. You're not an animal." Evelyn opened one of her bags, pulling out a worn quilt. "We can make do. It's only 3 nights." He watched her shake out the quilt, raising more dust. "You're taking this remarkably well for a woman who just married a killer." She paused in her work. "Are you trying to frighten me? Because if you wanted to hurt me, you've had ample opportunity. Besides," she continued, laying the quilt over the questionable rope supports, "everyone in that courthouse was so eager to tell me what a monster you are, but no one actually said what you did. Train robbery. They mentioned murder, they implied, but the specifics seemed less important than the scandal." Luke sat on the 3-legged table, testing its stability. "You don't want to know. Will it change the next 3 days?" "Maybe." Evelyn considered this, then shook her head. "Tell me or don't. It's your story, but I won't beg for it like those gossips in town, hungry for more reasons to condemn." For the first time since she'd pointed at him in the courthouse, Luke looked genuinely surprised. He wasn't used to people who didn't demand his sins be laid out for their judgment. The afternoon wore on as they made the cabin marginally habitable. Luke repaired the door hinge with some wire from the wagon while Evelyn swept out the worst of the debris. They worked in a comfortable silence, like a long-married couple instead of strangers bound by desperation. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Evelyn realized she was almost content. It made no sense. She'd lost everything, married a condemned man, and was living in a hovel that wouldn't shelter chickens properly. But for the first time in months, no one was watching her, whispering about her, measuring her against their narrow standards. "I can hunt," Luke offered as darkness approached. "Might be a rabbit or two around." "I have some cornmeal and beans," Evelyn replied. "Not much, but it'll do." They prepared the simple meal together, Luke coaxing a fire from the decrepit fireplace, while Evelyn mixed cornmeal mush and soaked beans she'd planned to cook later. The domestic routine felt surreal, as if they were playing house in the shadow of the gallows. "This is probably the strangest wedding night in the history of matrimony," Evelyn observed as they ate by firelight, seated on the floor since the table couldn't support the weight of dinner. "I don't know," Luke mused. "My cousin married a girl he'd never met, ordered from a catalog. Turned out she was wanted in 3 states for poisoning her previous husbands. This might only be the second strangest." Evelyn found herself laughing. Actually laughing, for the first time since her father's death. "What happened to them?" "Still married, far as I know. He's very careful about who cooks dinner." As the evening deepened, the awkwardness of sleeping arrangements loomed. The bed, such as it was, dominated the small space. Evelyn finally addressed it with her newfound directness. "We're both adults. We can share the bed without... That is, I trust you to be a gentleman." "Funny thing to say to a condemned outlaw," Luke pointed out. "You're my husband," she replied simply. "For 3 days. That means something. Even here, even like this." They prepared for bed with careful politeness, taking turns stepping outside while the other changed into nightclothes. When Luke returned, Evelyn was already under the quilt, pressed against the far edge of the questionable bed. He lay down carefully, fully clothed except for his boots, maintaining a careful distance between them. The desert night brought sounds coyotes in the distance, wind through the holes in the roof, the settling of old wood. Evelyn stared at the stars visible through the gaps above, acutely aware of the warmth of another person beside her for the first time in her life. "Thank you," she said quietly to the darkness. "For what?" "For not being what they said you were. For helping today. For..." She searched for words. "For letting me choose my own cage." Luke was quiet so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. "Then, maybe we both chose Mrs. Callahan. Maybe that's enough." The first morning arrived with a symphony of unfamiliar sounds, desert birds calling, wind rattling through loose boards, and the distant yip of coyotes heading home. Evelyn woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until she felt the empty space beside her. Luke's warmth lingered in the worn quilt, but the man himself was gone. Panic seized her throat. Had he run? Left her here alone to face the consequences? Then she heard the rhythmic sound of an axe on wood and peered through a gap in the wall. Luke was splitting kindling from dead mesquite, his movements efficient despite what must have been days of confinement. His shirt was already damp with sweat in the early heat. She dressed quickly and ventured outside, squinting in the brilliant morning sun. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, painted in shades of ochre and sage. It was beautiful in its desolation, honest in its harshness. "Morning," Luke said without turning. "Hope you like coffee made from chicory root, because that's all I could find growing wild." "I've never had it," Evelyn admitted, then added with a small smile. but I'm learning to appreciate new experiences." He glanced at her, something almost like amusement in his gray eyes. "That's one way to look at it." The chicory coffee was bitter enough to strip paint, but Evelyn drank it without complaint. They shared a breakfast of cold cornmeal mush from the night before, and she tried not to think about how this was her second day as a married woman, sharing morning rituals with a stranger who would be dead by week's end. "I need to check the snares," Luke announced, finishing his coffee. "Might catch something for dinner." "Snares. When did you—" "Early this morning. Old habits." He stood, brushing dust from his pants. "Want to come, might as well learn something useful in our limited time." Evelyn looked down at her dress, one of only 3 she now owned. "I'm not exactly dressed for traipsing through the desert." "There's some men's clothes in the cabin, probably left by whoever abandoned this place. Might fit if you belt them." The suggestion would have scandalized her a week ago. Now, it seemed eminently practical. She found the clothes canvas pants and a faded work shirt and changed while Luke waited outside. The pants were too large and too long, but a length of rope served as a belt, and she rolled the cuffs. Looking at her reflection in the cracked window glass, she barely recognized herself. "Well, don't you look like a proper desperado?" Luke observed when she emerged. "Takes one to know one," she retorted, then froze. Was it too soon to joke about his crimes? But he only smiled a real smile that transformed his scarred face. They walked into the desert, Luke pointing out signs she would have missed rabbit tracks in the dust. The telltale disturbance where a snake had passed. The specific plants that indicated water nearby. He moved with quiet confidence, clearly at home in this unforgiving landscape. "You know this land well," Evelyn observed, stepping carefully around a prickly pear cactus. "Spent a lot of time in places most folks avoid." He knelt by one of his snares, resetting it with practiced hands. "Desert doesn't lie, doesn't pretend to be safe when it's dangerous. You respect it. It might let you live. Unlike civilization." "Unlike civilization," he agreed. The 3rd snare had caught a rabbit. Luke dispatched it quickly and efficiently, and Evelyn was surprised to find she wasn't squeamish. Hunger had a way of adjusting one's sensibilities. "I should teach you to shoot," he said suddenly as they walked back. "Woman alone needs to know how to protect herself." "Do you have a gun?" "No, but there's an old Remington in the cabin. Saw it yesterday, wrapped in oilcloth under the floorboards. Probably left for emergencies." He paused. "This whole situation probably qualifies." Evelyn considered this. "Aren't you worried I'll shoot you?" "If you wanted me dead, you could have let the rope do it. Seems like a lot of extra work to marry me first just to shoot me after." The logic was sound, if morbid. Back at the cabin, Luke retrieved the gun, a battered but functional revolver with a handful of bullets. He checked it over with the same methodical care he'd shown with the snares, then led her a safe distance from the cabin. "First rule," he said, handing her the weapon. "Never point it at anything you don't intend to destroy." The gun was heavier than she expected, the metal warm from the desert sun. Luke stood behind her, adjusting her stance and grip with careful, impersonal touches. "Both hands, feet apart. Don't fight the weight work with it." His voice was patient, teacher-like. "See that dead cholla about 20 yards out? That's your target." Evelyn's first shot went wide enough to qualify as a complete miss. The recoil surprised her, sending her stumbling back into Luke's chest. He steadied her without comment. "Again, this time, squeeze, don't pull." The second shot was better. The third actually hit the cholla, sending dried pieces flying. By the 6th shot, she could hit it consistently. "Natural talent," Luke observed, taking the gun back. "Your father ever teach you to shoot?" "My father believed ladies shouldn't touch weapons." Evelyn flexed her tingling hands. "He believed a lot of things that turned out to be wrong." They spent the afternoon in strangely domestic pursuits. Luke cleaned and prepared the rabbit while Evelyn attempted to make the cabin more livable. She found an old broom and attacked the years of dust and debris with determination. He repaired the worst of the roof holes with scavenged materials. "Why bother?" she asked at one point, watching him balance precariously on the questionable furniture to reach a gap. "It's only for 2 more days." He paused in his work. "You have to live here after I'm gone. Least I can do is make sure the rain stays out." The casual reference to his death made her stomach clench. She'd almost forgotten, caught up in the simple rhythm of survival. As evening approached and they prepared the rabbit stew together, Evelyn found herself stealing glances at him. Who was this man who faced death with such calm? Who taught her survival skills he'd never see her use? Who treated her with more genuine respect in 2 days than she'd received from respectable society in months? "You can ask," he said without looking up from the pot he was stirring. "Ask what?" "Whatever's put that furrow between your eyebrows. You've been working up to it all day." Evelyn took a breath. "What did you really do? I mean, not the gossip version." Luke was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, factual. "I robbed a train, Southern Pacific Line outside Tucson. My partner and I thought it was carrying mine payroll. Information was good. Plan was solid." He stirred the stew mechanically. "Except there was a Pinkerton detective on board. Young fellow, eager to make his mark. When we announced the robbery, he went for his gun instead of keeping quiet like the other passengers. And my partner, Jed, was always too quick on the trigger. The detective fired, Jed fired, everybody fired. When the smoke cleared, the detective was dead, along with a passenger who'd been sitting behind him. Stray bullet." His jaw tightened. "A woman, traveling to meet her husband in California." Evelyn absorbed this, picturing the scene. "But you didn't shoot her." "I was there. I planned it. In the eyes of the law. That's enough." He finally looked at her. "They're not wrong. I chose that life. Those deaths are on my hands, whether I pulled the trigger or not." "What happened to Jed?" "Took a bullet in the escape. Died 3 days later in some canyon, cursing my name for getting him into it." Luke's smile was bitter. "Seems like 3 days is my lucky number." They ate in contemplative silence, the rabbit stew better than anything Evelyn had managed in her attempts at cooking. As darkness fell and they prepared for another night in the rickety bed, she felt the weight of his confession between them. "Does it change things?" he asked as they lay carefully apart in the darkness. "Knowing what I did?" Evelyn considered. "It makes you more real, less like the monster they painted, more like a man who made terrible choices." "That's a generous interpretation." Maybe I'm learning that the world isn't divided as neatly into good and evil as Redemption Creek would like to believe." She felt him shift beside her. "What are you going to do after?" The question she'd been avoiding. "I don't know. I can't go back to town. I'll always be the woman who married an outlaw. I suppose I'll have to find somewhere new. Become someone else." "There's money," Luke said suddenly. "From the robberies. Not much left, but enough to get you started somewhere. It's hidden about 2 miles north of here, in a cave marked by 3 standing stones." "I don't want blood money." "It's just money now. No point in it staying buried." He paused. "Consider it a wedding gift." The absurdity of it, a condemned man giving his 3-day bride stolen money as a wedding present, struck them both. Evelyn found herself laughing, and after a moment, Luke joined her. They laughed until their sides hurt, until tears came, until the laughter turned to something else entirely. "This is insane," Evelyn gasped. "Completely," Luke agreed. "But what about any of this isn't—" In the darkness, her hand found his. It was meant as comfort. Solidarity between 2 people the world had written off, but something electric passed between them at the touch. Luke went very still. "Evelyn," his voice carried a warning. "I know," she whispered, but she didn't let go. They lay like that, hands clasped between them like a lifeline, as if physical connection could stop time. Neither spoke of tomorrow, of the dawn creeping closer with each heartbeat. Instead, they talked of small things, favorite foods, childhood memories, books read and songs half remembered. They built a lifetime of conversation into hours, cramming decades of knowing into moments. When Evelyn finally drifted to sleep, her hand still in his, Luke remained awake. He memorized the sound of her breathing, the way moonlight through the roof holes caught in her hair, the unexpected strength in her small fingers. He'd faced death before hazard of his chosen profession, but this was the first time he'd minded its approach. The second day was ending. Only one more sunrise remained. The third day dawned clear and merciless, the desert sun promising another day of punishing heat. But Evelyn woke to something wrong. Luke's breathing was labored, his skin burning with fever when she touched his forehead. "Luke," she shook him gently. His eyes opened, unfocused and glassy. "I'm fine," he mumbled, trying to sit up and failing. "Just tired." But he wasn't fine. As Evelyn pulled back the quilt, she saw what he'd been hiding. His shirt was stained with blood along his left side. The fabric stuck to what looked like an infected wound. "When did this happen?" She carefully peeled the shirt away, revealing an angry, inflamed gash along his ribs. "During the arrest," his voice was thick. "Deputy's rifle butt had a sharp edge. Didn't seem bad at first." "Didn't seem, Luke. This is infected." The wound was hot to the touch, the edges an alarming red with streaks beginning to spread. "Why didn't you say something?" He managed a weak smile. "Didn't see the point. Dead man walking. Remember?" "Not yet. You're not." Evelyn stood, her mind racing. She'd helped her mother tend sick neighbors, had basic knowledge of herbs and poultices, but this needed more than basic knowledge. "I need to find feverfew and willow bark, maybe some echinacea if it grows here." "Evelyn, don't—" She was already reaching for the canteen. "Don't you dare give up on your last day. Not when—" She stopped herself before finishing. "Not when I'm just beginning to know you." She left him water within reach and ventured into the morning heat. The desert, which had seemed barren before, now revealed itself as she searched desperately for the plants her mother had taught her about. Willow would be near water. She remembered the scraggly trees near the stream a half-mile east. Feverfew might grow in the shadow of larger rocks. The sun climbed mercilessly as she searched. Her men's clothes were soaked with sweat, her hands scratched from reaching into thorny places. But she found what she needed. Willow bark stripped carefully from low branches, feverfew growing wild near an outcropping, and, by pure luck, a small patch of echinacea that had somehow survived the dry summer. When she returned, Luke's fever had worsened. He was delirious, muttering about trains and gunfire, about a woman named Sarah who might have been his mother or the passenger who died. Evelyn worked with desperate efficiency, boiling water for tea, making a poultice for the wound, tearing strips from her petticoat for bandages. "Come on," she murmured, supporting his head to help him drink the bitter willow bark tea. "You survived Jed, survived the arrest, survived that joke of a trial. You're not dying from an infection. I won't allow it." He focused on her face with effort. "Bossy for a new bride." "You have no idea." The hours blurred together. She bathed his fever with precious water, changed the poultice when it cooled, forced tea between his lips whenever he'd take it. The sun reached its zenith and began its descent, marking the passage of their last day together. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Luke's fever finally began to break. His breathing eased, and when he opened his eyes, they were clear again. "You stayed," he said, as if surprised. "Where would I go?" Evelyn sat back on her heels, exhausted. "You're my husband." "For about 6 more hours?" The reminder hit like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on the immediate crisis, she'd almost forgotten what sunrise would bring. "Can you ride?" she asked suddenly. Luke struggled to sit up, wincing. "Evelyn, can you ride?" she repeated more forcefully. "I suppose, but—" "Then we're leaving." She stood, decision crystallizing. "They expect you to wait here like a lamb for slaughter, but there's nothing keeping us here except their expectations. I gave my word. To men who would hang you for another man's trigger finger, who would send me to die in Yuma for the crime of trying to survive." She began gathering their few possessions. "Your word means something. Luke, theirs doesn't." He watched her whirlwind of activity with something like wonder. "They'll hunt us. Then we'll run. It's not much of a life, always looking over your shoulder." She paused in her packing to look at him directly. "It's life. That's more than they're offering." Luke was quiet for a long moment, then slowly got to his feet. The effort clearly cost him, but he stayed upright. "You sure about this? Once we run, there's no going back. You'll be a fugitive too." "I became a fugitive the moment I chose you in that courthouse." She handed him his shirt, newly washed and mended where she'd cut it away. "At least now I'll be a living one." They packed quickly, efficiently. The money Luke had mentioned hidden exactly where he'd said was enough to buy horses and supplies somewhere far from here. Evelyn changed back into a dress for traveling, though she kept the men's clothes. Luke strapped on the old Remington, the weight of it seeming to steady him. As they prepared to leave the cabin that had been their strange honeymoon home, Luke caught her hand. "Evelyn, wait." She turned to find him closer than expected, his gray eyes serious in the fading light. "This morning, when I was burning up, I kept thinking about all the things I should have said, how I should have told you that you're the bravest woman I've ever met, how these 3 days have been worth more than the years that came before." He touched her face gently, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "How if I'd met you sooner? Maybe I'd have been a different man." "You're the man I chose," she whispered. "That's enough." He kissed her then, soft at first, then deeper as she responded. It tasted of fever tea and desperation, of might-have-beens and still-could-be's. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, the last of the daylight was fading. "We need to go," Evelyn said, though every part of her wanted to stay in this moment. They left as darkness fell, taking the ancient mare and walking beside her to spare her the weight. Luke moved stiffly but determinedly, the fever's aftermath and his wound making each step an effort. They traveled by moonlight, using skills he'd taught her to navigate by stars and landmarks. "Where will we go?" Evelyn asked as they paused to rest near a cluster of barrel cacti. "Mexico, maybe, or California. Somewhere they're more interested in the future than the past." He studied her in the moonlight. "You could still go back. Tell them I forced you, that you escaped. Luke Callahan, if you suggest abandoning you one more time, I'll shoot you myself and save the hangman the trouble." He laughed, then winced as it pulled at his wound. "Yes, ma'am." They walked through the night, two figures against the vast darkness of the desert. Behind them, Redemption Creek slept, secure in its righteousness. Come dawn, Deputy Collins would find an empty cabin and a cold trail. There would be outrage, search parties, wanted posters with their names. But for now, there was only the desert and the stars and the strange, unexpected gift of each other. Luke's fever had broken. The infection would heal with care. And somewhere beyond the horizon lay a place where they could be more than their worst mistakes. "I just realized," Evelyn said as they crested a rise, "I never asked if Luke Callahan is even your real name." "It's not," he admitted. "But then, you're not really Mrs. Callahan either, are you?" "I suppose not." She considered this. "So, who are we?" He took her hand, their fingers interlacing naturally now. "Whoever we choose to be." The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, not with the dawn of his execution, but with the promise of a new day. They had no illusions the road ahead would be hard, dangerous, uncertain. They were outlaws now, both of them, bound by choice rather than law. but as they descended into a canyon that would hide their passage, Evelyn thought about the woman she'd been 3 days ago, trapped, helpless, at the mercy of others' judgments. That woman had died in the courthouse, choosing scandal over surrender. "No regrets?" Luke asked, as if reading her thoughts. She squeezed his hand. "Only that we only had 3 days." "Well," he said, that rare smile transforming his scarred face. "Looks like we've got more than that now." They did. How many more was uncertain, maybe days, maybe years, maybe decades if they were lucky and clever, but it was theirs, earned through fever and desperation and the radical act of choosing each other when the world wanted to choose for them. The sun rose on their 4th day together, painting the desert in shades of gold and possibility. Somewhere behind them, a gallows stood empty. Ahead, the trail wound into the unknown, dangerous and free. They walked toward it together, no longer stranger and outlaw, but something new partners in the oldest crime of all hope. 6 weeks had passed since their flight from Redemption Creek, and the abandoned mining camp they'd found in the mountains had become something approaching a home. The structure was sturdier than their honeymoon cabin built by miners who'd expected to stay until the silver ran out. They'd cleaned it, patched it, made it theirs. Luke's wound had healed to a pink scar, another mark on a body that told too many violent stories. But his hands, those same hands that had once held guns for robbery, now held tools for building. He'd repaired the roof properly this time, fashioned furniture from salvaged wood, even managed to fix the old stove they'd found half buried behind the building. Evelyn had transformed as well. The desperate woman who'd stood in a courthouse had given way to someone stronger, surer. She wore men's clothes more often than dresses, now practical for the life they led. Her hands had roughened from work. Her skin had darkened from sun, and she'd never felt more herself. "I got 2 rabbits," Luke announced, returning from his morning hunt. "And I saw fresh deer tracks by the stream. Might try for one tomorrow." "We're almost out of flour," Evelyn noted. Not looking up from the ledger she kept. Every penny counted. Every supply carefully tracked. "We'll need to go to town soon." Town was Silver Hollow, a half-day's ride down the mountain. It was just large enough that strangers didn't draw too much attention, just lawless enough that folks didn't ask too many questions. They went separately, never together, and never gave the same name twice. Luke set the rabbits on the table and moved behind her, reading over her shoulder. His proximity still sent an unexpected thrill through her. They were playing at being married in that first cabin, but here in their mountain refuge, the pretense had become truth in every way that mattered. "We're doing all right," he said, studying her careful figures. "Better than all right." They were. The hidden money had bought supplies and a pair of good horses. Luke's skills hunting, tracking, reading the land kept them fed. Evelyn had discovered a talent for trading, turning their surplus of smoked meat and wild herbs into necessities at Silver Hollow's general store. "Sarah McKenna mentioned they're looking for a school teacher," Evelyn said carefully. "The last one married a rancher and moved away." Luke stilled. "Evelyn, I could use another name. Cut my hair. Maybe, who'd recognize the proper Miss Monroe in a frontier schoolmarm?" "It's too dangerous." "Everything's dangerous." She turned to face him. "But we can't hide forever. We need to build something, not just survive." He cupped her face in his hands, studying her with those intense gray eyes. "I won't let them take you. They'd have to find us first." She covered his hands with hers. "Besides, I'm not the same woman who stood in that courthouse. That woman couldn't shoot, couldn't ride, couldn't survive a day alone. You taught me well." "Maybe too well," he murmured, but he was smiling. Their days had developed a rhythm, mornings of work and hunting, afternoons maintaining their hidden home, evenings by the fire where Luke was teaching Evelyn to read tracts in exchange for her teaching him the poetry she'd memorized as a girl. It was during one of these quiet evenings that everything changed. "Someone's coming," Luke said suddenly, reaching for the rifle. Evelyn heard it 2 horses, moving carefully but not stealthily, not trying to sneak up, but not announcing themselves either. "Stay inside," Luke ordered, checking the rifle's load. Like hell. Evelyn was already reaching for the Remington, now cleaned and oiled and hers by right of practice. The riders came into view, two men, travel-worn and careful. Luke relaxed slightly when he recognized one. "Tom Garrett," he called out. "Long way from Texas." Tom Garrett was a grizzled man in his 50s, with the look of someone who'd lived outside the law so long he'd forgotten there was an inside. His companion was younger, Mexican by his features, with watchful eyes and a tied-down holster. "Luke Callahan," Tom replied, dismounting slowly. "Heard you were dead." "Heard the same. Decided not to be." Tom's weathered face cracked into a grin. "Good decision. Mind if we light a spell? Been riding hard for 3 days?" Luke glanced at Evelyn. A silent question. She nodded slightly. These were his people from his old life, dangerous men, but tired ones who needed rest. "Stables around back," Luke said. "Coffee's on." The four of them sat awkwardly around the rough table Luke had built, coffee steaming between them like a peace offering. Tom's companion had been introduced as Miguel Serrano, who spoke little but missed nothing. "This your woman?" Tom asked, nodding at Evelyn. "The one from the newspapers." "Newspapers?" Evelyn kept her voice level. Tom pulled out a folded, water-stained paper. The headline screamed, "Outlaw and Judge's Forced Bride Still at Large." Below was a sketch that looked vaguely like her and Luke, though the artist had given him demonic features and her the vapid look of a victim. $500 for information leading to capture. Tom read, "Judge Blackwood's taking it personal-like." "He would," Evelyn muttered. "Thing is," Tom continued, "there's folks who think what happened in Redemption Creek wasn't right. Forcing a woman to marry or face prison ain't justice, even by frontier standards. You've got more sympathy than you might think." "Sympathy doesn't stop bullets," Luke pointed out. "No, but it might stop folks from looking too hard." Tom sipped his coffee. "Which brings me to why we're here. Got a proposition." Luke tensed. "I'm out of that life. Tom, not asking you back in, but there's a situation needs handling, and you've got skills we need." Tom glanced at Evelyn. "Both of you, from what I hear, word is Mrs. Callahan here talked down 3 drunk cowboys in Silver Hollow last week. Kept them from shooting up the general store." Evelyn flushed. She hadn't realized that story had traveled. "There's a man named Cyrus Briggs," Tom continued. "Bought up half the valley down south, forcing out families who've been there for generations. Uses legal tricks when he can, hired guns when he can't. Good people are suffering." "Not our problem," Luke said flatly. "Maybe not, but Briggs has something else, a ledger documenting every bribe, every forced sale, every murder for hire, including names of judges and lawmen on his payroll." Tom's eyes were steady. "Names like Cornelius Blackwood." The room went very quiet. "You help us get that ledger," Tom said softly. "And maybe certain wanted posters stop being quite so wanted. Maybe certain judges find themselves too busy with their own troubles to hunt runaway brides." Evelyn found herself leaning forward. "What would you need us to do?" "Evelyn, no." Luke's voice was sharp. "This isn't our fight." "Isn't it?" She met his gaze squarely. "We can't run forever. Luke, eventually, they'll find us. But if we had something on Blackwood..." "It's dangerous." "So was marrying an outlaw. So was running. So is every single day we live like this." She turned back to Tom. "Tell us more." Tom outlined the plan. There was to be a party at Briggs's ranch, a celebration of his latest acquisition. All the local elite would attend, including corrupt officials who'd helped him steal land. "We need someone who can blend in with that crowd," Tom said. "Someone educated, refined. Someone who can find that ledger while the rest of us create a distraction." "Someone like a judge's daughter," Evelyn said quietly. The thought had occurred. Luke stood abruptly, chair scraping. "No, absolutely not. I won't let her walk into that viper's nest." "Let—" Evelyn's voice was dangerously quiet. He turned to her, desperate. "You don't understand. I've seen what men like Briggs do to—" "To women, to people who oppose them." She stood as well, facing him. "I understand perfectly. I've been on the receiving end of powerful men's cruelty. Remember, this is different." "Yes, this time I'd be choosing the danger. This time I'd have a purpose beyond just surviving." She touched his arm. "Luke, we've been so focused on running from our past. We've forgotten to build a future. This could give us that chance." Miguel spoke for the first time. "The Senora is right. Sometimes, to stop running, you must turn and fight." Luke looked between them, all Tom's weathered hope, Miguel's quiet certainty, and Evelyn's fierce determination. His shoulders slumped in defeat. "If we do this," he said slowly, "we do it my way. Every detail planned, every escape route mapped. And if I say we abort, we abort. No arguments." Tom grinned. "Wouldn't have it any other way." They spent the rest of the evening planning. Evelyn would need a new identity, a convincing story, appropriate clothes. She'd need to arrive separately, establish herself as someone Briggs would want at his party. It was dangerous, complex, requiring skills she'd never dreamed of needing. But as she listened to the men plan, Evelyn felt something she hadn't experienced since before her father's death purpose. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was choosing to act, to fight back against the system that had tried to crush her. Later, after Tom and Miguel had bedded down in the stable, Luke and Evelyn lay together in their rough bed. His arms were tight around her, as if he could protect her from the danger she'd volunteered for. "I'm scared," he admitted in the darkness. "More scared than I've ever been. And I've faced down Pazes and Pinkertons." "Why?" "Because I've never had something to lose before. Not like this." His voice was rough with emotion. "These weeks with you, I didn't know life could be like this. Peaceful, happy. I didn't know I could be the man I am with you." She turned in his arms, finding his face in the darkness. "You're still that man, but sometimes, to protect peace, you have to fight for it." "When did you become so wise?" "Somewhere between learning to shoot and learning to love an outlaw." He kissed her then, deep and desperate, as if trying to memorize the moment. When they broke apart, she could feel his acceptance, his resignation to her choice. "All right," he whispered. "We'll do this, but Evelyn, if anything happens to you—" "It won't. I'll have you watching my back. Won't I, you and your band of reformed outlaws?" Reformed might be overstating it. They held each other as dawn approached, neither sleeping. The peaceful weeks in their mountain sanctuary were ending. The real world, with all its dangers and corruptions, was calling them back, but this time, they wouldn't be running from it. They'd be riding straight into its heart, armed with nothing but courage, clever planning, and the kind of love that makes people do impossible things. The morning sun found them already up, preparing for war disguised as a party, ready to gamble everything on a chance to stop running and start living. The dust cloud on the horizon meant only one thing, riders, and many of them. Luke lowered his field glasses, his face grim in the afternoon sun. They'd been at the mountain camp for 3 months now, and this was what he'd feared every day since. "How many?" Evelyn asked, though she could guess from his expression. 20, maybe more. Moving fast but organized. This isn't a posse of locals." He turned to where Tom and Miguel were already saddling horses. "It's Blackwood. Has to be." They'd known this day might come. The plan with Briggs's ledger had been their hope to prevent it, but that was still days away. Somehow, Blackwood had found them first. "The cave system," Miguel said urgently. "We can lose them in the passages." "Too risky with this many." Luke was already loading rifles, his movements efficient but tense. They'll just wait us out or smoke us out. Evelyn felt fear curl in her stomach, but beneath it, something else anger. They'd built something here, carved out a small piece of happiness, and now Blackwood was coming to destroy it, just as he'd destroyed her life in Redemption Creek. "I'm done running," she heard herself say. 3 heads turned to stare at her. "Evelyn," Luke started. "No." She stood straighter, decision crystallizing. "We've been reactive since the day we met, always responding to their moves, their choices. What if we chose the battlefield this time?" "What are you thinking?" Tom asked, recognizing the look of someone forming a plan. She moved to the window, studying the approaching dust cloud. "Blackwood wants me back to prove his power, to show that no one defies him. What if I gave him that chance?" "Absolutely not," Luke said flatly. "Hear me out. He's expecting fugitives desperate, scared, ready to fight or flee. What if instead he found a woman ready to negotiate, to come back voluntarily under the right conditions?" "He'd never believe it," Tom argued. "He might, if I sold it right. His ego is his weakness. He needs to believe he's won, that I've seen the error of my ways." She turned back to them. "While I'm keeping him talking, buying time, you 3 circle around. 20 men is too many to face head on, but distracted, spread out, thinking they've already won." "It's suicide," Luke said, but she could see him thinking, calculating. "It's strategy." She moved to him, taking his hands. "Luke, you taught me to shoot, to ride, to survive. Trust me to use those skills now." He searched her face, and she saw the moment he understood. This wasn't the desperate, trapped woman from the courthouse. This was someone who'd found her strength, who'd learned to fight back. "If we do this," he said slowly. "We do it smart, Miguel. You know the sniper positions in the rocks. Tom, those flash bombs you brought for the Briggs job, how many do we have?" As they planned, Evelyn changed into her one remaining good dress, the blue one from her mother. She pinned her hair up properly, erasing the wild freedom of recent months. Looking in the cracked mirror, she saw Miss Monroe again, but underneath, Mrs. Callahan waited, armed and dangerous. "You look like a judge's daughter," Luke said from the doorway, pain in his voice. "I am a judge's daughter. I'm also an outlaw's wife." She checked the derringer hidden in her sleeve. "Today, I need to be both." The riders were close now, close enough to see individual figures. Blackwood rode at the center, protected by hired guns. She recognized Deputy Collins, looking uncomfortable but determined. And there, her heart clenched, was Josiah Pruitt, the man she'd been supposed to marry. "Remember," Luke said urgently, "keep them talking. Keep them focused on you. We'll need at least 10 minutes to get into position." "I'll give you 15. She kissed him quickly, fiercely. "Don't you dare get shot. I've gotten used to having a husband." "Same to you, wife." Then he was gone, melting into the rocks with Tom and Miguel, leaving Evelyn to face her past alone. She walked out of the cabin slowly, hands visible but head high. The riders pulled up short, clearly not expecting such a calm reception. "Judge Blackwood," she called out, her voice carrying the cultured tones of her upbringing. "You've come a long way for a social call." Blackwood dismounted, his face a mix of triumph and suspicion. 3 months had aged him. The stolen ledger plan must have been causing him problems already. "Hey, Mrs. Callahan." He made the name sound like profanity. "Or should I say, Miss Monroe. Your sham marriage was annulled the day your outlaw husband failed to appear for his hanging." "A technicality," Evelyn replied coolly. "Rather like the technicalities you use to steal land and destroy lives." His face darkened. "You'll watch your tongue, girl. You're coming back to face justice." "Justice," she laughed, the sound bright and bitter. "Is that what you call it? Tell me. Judge, How much did Cyrus Briggs pay you to validate his land claims? How many families did you destroy for 30 pieces of silver? Several of the hired guns shifted uneasily. Even corrupted men had limits, and Blackwood's connection to Briggs was apparently news to some. Careful, Blackwood warned. You're in no position to make accusations. Aren't I? She moved slightly, drawing their eyes, keeping their focus. In her peripheral vision, she caught movement in the rocks, her men getting into position. You see, Judge, I've had time to think these past months. Time to understand how things really work in your version of justice. Get to the point. The point is, I'm tired. Tired of running. Tired of hiding. Tired of living like an animal because you needed someone to punish for your bruised ego. She let exhaustion creep into her voice, a calculated vulnerability. What do you want to end this? Blackwood's eyes lit up. This was what he'd wanted: submission, defeat. You come back, stand trial properly, serve your time in Yuma. And Luke, the outlaw hangs, should have months ago. She appeared to consider this, buying precious seconds. Where were they? The rocks seemed empty, but she knew better. Luke was out there, watching, waiting for the right moment. Counter-offer, she said. I come back, publicly apologize for embarrassing you and the town. I serve 6 months not in Yuma, but in the local jail. In exchange, Luke goes free. Full pardon. You're hardly in a position to negotiate. I'm in a perfect position. You brought 20 men to capture 1 woman. Judge, how does that look? How desperate does that make you seem? She smiled coldly. But a repentant woman returning voluntarily, begging forgiveness that makes you merciful, powerful, the kind of man who can afford to be generous. She could see him considering it, his ego warring with his vindictiveness. Josiah Pruitt spoke up suddenly. Take the deal. Cornelius, this has gone on long enough. Shut up, Josiah, Blackwood snapped. You had your chance with her and were too spineless to take it. I've seen what you've become, Josiah continued, surprising everyone. This isn't justice, it's revenge, and it's eating you alive. The tension ratcheted higher. Some of the hired guns were looking thoughtful now, reconsidering their employer. Deputy Collins had his hand on his gun, but he was watching Blackwood, not Evelyn. Enough, Blackwood roared. Men, take her. Shoot anyone who interferes. That's when the first flash bomb exploded. Tom Garrett knew his business. The bomb went off directly in front of the horses, sending them rearing and screaming in the chaos. Evelyn dropped flat, rolling behind a water trough as gunfire erupted. Luke's first shot took the gun out of the nearest mercenary's hand. His second sent another's hat flying. The message clear: he could have killed them but chose not to. Yet. Miguel's rifle spoke from a different angle. Precise shots that disabled weapons and created panic without killing. These weren't hardened killers. Most of them just men hired for what they thought would be an easy job. Take cover, Blackwood screamed. But there was no cover in the clearing, exactly as Evelyn had planned. Another flash bomb exploded, this time behind the group, creating complete disorientation in the smoke and confusion. Evelyn saw Deputy Collins grab Josiah Pruitt and pull of him to safety behind a boulder, taking him out of the fight. Blackwood, Luke's voice rang out from the rocks. Call off your men, or we start shooting to kill. You're outnumbered, Blackwood shouted back, but his voice cracked with fear. Numbers don't matter when you're shooting fish in a barrel. Tom called from another position. Your men are sitting ducks down there. To prove the point, 3 rapid shots took the guns from 3 more men's holsters, leaving them clutching bleeding hands. I've got a bead on you, Judge, Miguel added, his voice carrying deadly calm. 1 squeeze of the trigger, and all your corruption dies with you. The hired guns were already backing away, realizing they'd walked into a trap. Men who fought for money knew when the pay wasn't worth the risk. Stand your ground, Blackwood ordered, but his authority was crumbling. Evelyn rose from her cover, the derringer in her hand now, It's over. Judge, your men are abandoning you, your schemes are unraveling, and the only thing keeping you alive is our mercy. The same mercy you never showed anyone else. You can't kill a judge, he sputtered. They'll hunt you forever. We're already hunted. What's the difference? She moved closer, and he actually backed away. But you're right. We won't kill you. That would make us like you. Luke emerged from the rocks, rifle steady. Tom and Miguel appeared from their positions, creating a triangle of firepower around the remaining men. Here's what's going to happen, Luke said. You're going to get on your horse and ride back to Redemption Creek. You're going to forget about us, and if we ever see you again, if we hear about you sending anyone else after us, we won't be so generous. You can't threaten. We're not threatening, Evelyn interrupted. We're promising, and unlike you, we keep our word. Deputy Collins stood up from behind his boulder. Judge, maybe we should listen. This has gone far enough. You work for me, Blackwood snarled. I work for the law, Collins replied. And lately, I'm not sure you remember what that means. More of the hired guns were mounting their horses, eager to leave. The tide had turned completely. Oh, and Judge, Evelyn added. That ledger you're so worried about Cyrus Briggs's record of all his payments to corrupt officials, we've had it for weeks. One word from us, and every newspaper from here to San Francisco gets a copy. It was a lie they hadn't gotten the ledger yet, but Blackwood went white as paste. You wouldn't dare. Try us. Her smile was sharp as glass. Now get out of here before we change our minds about that mercy. Blackwood looked around at his disappearing army, at the guns pointed at him, at the woman who'd refused to break. His shoulders slumped in defeat. This isn't over, he said, but it sounded hollow. Yes, Evelyn said quietly. It is. They watched as the judge and his remaining men rode away, dust clouds marking their retreat. Only when they were specks on the horizon did Luke lower his rifle. That was the most foolish, dangerous, brilliant thing I've ever seen, he said, pulling Evelyn into his arms. I learned from the best, she murmured against his chest. Tom whistled appreciatively. Remind me never to play poker with your wife. Luke. I can't believe it worked, Miguel added. They just left. Because she gave them a way out that let them keep their pride, Luke said, understanding. Dead men can't learn lessons. Humiliated men remember them. As the adrenaline faded, Evelyn began to shake. The magnitude of what they'd just done, what could have happened, hit her all at once. Hey, Luke said softly, tilting her chin up. You did it. You faced him down and won. We won, she corrected. I couldn't have done any of this without you, any of you. So what now? Tom asked. Blackwood might come back, might not, but this place is compromised. Evelyn and Luke exchanged a long look. The cabin had been their sanctuary, but it was just walls and a roof. What they'd built together was stronger than any place. We move on. Luke decided, head west. Maybe California's got room for people starting over. Together, Evelyn asked, though she knew the answer. Always together. He kissed her forehead. Mrs. Callahan. As they began packing what they could carry, leaving behind what they couldn't, Evelyn felt a chapter closing. The frightened woman who'd stood in a courthouse was gone. The desperate fugitive who'd run into the night was gone too. In their place stood someone new, shaped by hardship, strengthened by love, dangerous when cornered but merciful when possible. She'd chosen an outlaw who looked like sin on a saddle, and in doing so, had discovered her own outlaw heart. The sun was setting as they rode away from the cabin, 4 figures heading west into possibility. Behind them, their former sanctuary stood empty, but for the memories of 3 months when 2 broken people had found wholeness in each other. Blackwood would spread his stories, but stories had a way of changing in the telling. By the time the tale reached California, It might be about a judge's daughter who tamed an outlaw, or an outlaw who saved a lady's honor, or any number of romantic revisions. Only they would know the truth that salvation hadn't come from one or the other, but from the choice to stand together when the world wanted them to fall apart. The desert stretched before them, vast and unforgiving and honest. They rode into it without fear. The confrontation had ended, but its echoes rippled outward like stones thrown in still water. As Blackwood and his men disappeared over the horizon, Deputy Collins remained behind, his horse standing apart from the fleeing group. "Deputy," Luke said warily, rifle still in hand though lowered. "You lost?" Collins dismounted slowly, hands visible. "No, just reconsidering some things." He looked at Evelyn, really looked at her for the first time since that day in the courthouse. "Your father would be proud. Miss Monroe, the way you stood up to Blackwood, that took real courage." "It's Mrs. Callahan," she corrected gently. "And my father believed in the law. What would he think of his daughter married to an outlaw?" "I think," Collins said carefully, "he'd understand that sometimes the law and justice aren't the same thing. What Blackwood did to you wasn't justice. What he's been doing to folks all over the county isn't either." "Pretty words." Tom interjected, "But you still wearing that badge?" Collins unpinned the star from his chest, studying it. "Been wearing it for 15 years. Thought I was doing right. But when a judge sends 20 armed men after one woman—" He shook his head. "Maybe it's time I found a new line of work." "What do you want?" "Collins," Luke asked directly. "To tell you something, Blackwood's more desperate than you know. That ledger you mentioned. He's been losing sleep over it. Cyrus Briggs has been getting nervous, talking about cleaning house. Men like Blackwood might find themselves swept out with the trash." "You're saying he might not be a problem much longer," Miguel observed. "I'm saying desperate men do desperate things. Watch your backs." Collins remounted his horse. "For what it's worth, I'll be telling folks you headed south to Mexico. Might buy you some time." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Mrs. Callahan. That trick with the flash bombs and crossfire. Your daddy taught me that same maneuver years ago. Said it was better to outsmart violence than meet it head on. Seems his daughter learned the lesson even if his town forgot it." They watched him ride away, taking a different path than Blackwood's group. "Well," Tom said eventually, "that was unexpected." "My father touched more lives than I knew," Evelyn said softly. "Maybe some of them still remember what he stood for." They worked quickly to pack what they could carry. The cabin had accumulated more than expected in 3 months' evidence of the life they'd built together. Evelyn found herself lingering over small things the wooden spoon Luke had carved for her, the wildflowers she'd dried and hung by the window, the book of poetry they'd been reading together by firelight. "We can't take it all," Luke said gently, understanding her hesitation. "I know, it's just, this was our first real home. Home isn't walls and a roof." He pulled her close. "It's wherever we are together." Tom cleared his throat. "Not to interrupt, but we should move. Blackwood might change his mind, or send others." They loaded the horses efficiently. Tom and Miguel would accompany them as far as the border pass, then head their own way. The partnership that had brought them together was dissolving, but the bonds formed in crisis would remain. As they rode out, Evelyn turned for one last look at the cabin. The late afternoon sun caught the windows, making them glow like golden eyes. She fixed the image in her memory not as an ending, but as proof that they could build something beautiful anywhere. The trail wound through stands of pine and juniper. Climbing higher into the mountains, they rode in comfortable silence, each lost in thought. The confrontation with Blackwood had changed things, shifted the balance. They were no longer merely fugitives. They'd become something more dangerous, people who refused to be victims. As darkness approached, they made camp in a sheltered grove. Tom produced a bottle of whiskey from his saddlebags. "Seems fitting to mark the occasion," he said. passing it around, to unlikely partnerships and successful stands, to facing down the past, Miguel added. To choosing your own future, Luke said, eyes on Evelyn. To the family you make, Evelyn finished, surprising herself with the word, but looking around the fire at these men who'd risked everything for her and Luke. She knew it was true. They shared stories as the stars emerged. Tom told of his youth in Texas, before the war changed everything. Miguel spoke of crossing borders, of being caught between two worlds and choosing to belong to neither fully. Luke, usually reticent about his past, shared memories of his Tennessee childhood, before loss and anger set him on the outlaw path. What about you, Evelyn? Tom asked. What was the judge's daughter like before all this? She considered the question. Sheltered, naive. I thought being good and following rules would keep me safe. I embroidered samplers and played piano and waited for life to happen to me. She smiled ruefully. Then life happened with a vengeance. Regret it? Miguel asked. Parts of it, the pain, the fear, the loss. She reached for Luke's hand. But not the choices I made, not who I've become. Later, when Tom and Miguel had rolled into their blankets, Luke and Evelyn sat together watching the fire die to embers. The night sounds of the forest surrounded them, owls calling, small creatures rustling, wind through pine needles. I've been thinking, Luke said quietly, about what's next. California. Maybe, or maybe somewhere nobody goes. Build another cabin. Better this time. Raise horses, maybe cattle. Live quiet. That's not who you are anymore. Evelyn said, who we are. We can't pretend the world doesn't exist. Then what? She'd been thinking too, plans forming like storm clouds. What if we used what we know help other people in impossible situations? The skills you taught me, the ones I taught myself, they could make a difference. You want us to become, what, heroes for hire. I want us to be what my father believed in, people who stand between the powerful and the powerless. Not outlaws exactly, but not law-abiding citizens either. Something in between. Luke turned to study her face in the firelight. That's a dangerous line to walk. We've been walking it for months. Might as well do it with purpose. He was quiet for a long moment. Your father really would be proud. You've become everything he believed in, just not the way he expected. The way nobody expected, including me. She leaned against his shoulder. But I need you to want this too. Not just follow my lead because you think you owe me. Owe you? He laughed softly. Evelyn, you saved my life in every way that matters. Before you, I was just waiting to die, whether by rope or bullet. You gave me a reason to live. If you want to save the world, I'll help you do it. Not the world, just our corner of it. Our corner, he agreed. I like the sound of that. The next morning brought decisions. At the border pass, where trails diverged toward different futures, Tom and Miguel prepared to part ways. That offer to join us still stands. Tom said, could use people like you in the organization. Thanks, Luke replied. But we've got our own path to follow. Tom nodded. Understanding. If you ever need anything backup, information, a place to lay low, send word to the Black Horse Saloon in Tucson. They'll know how to find me. Miguel stepped forward, surprising everyone by embracing first Luke, then Evelyn. Vaya con Dios, he said simply. May you find what you seek. What will you do? Evelyn asked. Return home. My village has its own Judge Blackwood. Perhaps it's time someone stood up to him. They watched the two men ride south until they vanished into the heat shimmer. Then Luke and Evelyn turned their horses west, toward whatever future they would build. The journey took days through changing landscape, mountain giving way to desert, desert to grassland. They met other travelers, shared meals with families heading to California, helped repair a broken wagon wheel. Each interaction reinforced Evelyn's growing certainty. There were good people out here, trying to build lives, often prey to those who used power without conscience. On the seventh day, they crested a rise and saw it spread below a valley green with spring rain, a river winding through it silver as a promise, a small town clustered at a crossroads, smoke rising from chimneys, the sound of life carrying on the wind. "What do you think?" Luke asked. "I think it needs us," Evelyn replied, "or we need it, or both." They rode down slowly, taking in details. The town was big enough to get lost in, but small enough that injustice couldn't hide. They could see a sheriff's office, a general store, a church, a school, all the pieces of civilization, with all its potential for good or ill. "We'll need new names," Luke said practically, "histories that will hold up." "I've been thinking about that. What about the Calhouns? Similar enough we won't forget, different enough to throw off casual questions. And our story? The truth, mostly. A couple seeking a fresh start after trouble back east. It's common enough." They stopped at the edge of town, taking a last moment as the people they'd been, Luke Callahan, the outlaw, and Evelyn Monroe, the scandal, would end here. What began would be shaped by their choices from this moment on. "Ready?" Luke asked. "I chose you when you were heading for the gallows," Evelyn reminded him. "This seems considerably less dramatic." "Give it time," he said dryly. "Knowing us, we'll find drama soon enough." They rode into town side by side, dust-covered and travel-worn but unbowed. People glanced at them with the mild curiosity given any strangers, then went back to their business. No recognition, no whispered scandals, no judgment except what they would earn through actions. At the hotel, they signed the register as Mr. and Mrs. James Calhoun. The clerk barely looked up, just handed them a key and pointed toward the stairs. Such ordinary interaction felt like a miracle. In their room, simple but clean, with a window overlooking the main street, they stood together watching the town go about its evening routines. Somewhere out there were people who needed what they could offer. Somewhere were bullies who needed stopping, victims who needed protecting, injustices that needed righting. "No regrets?" Luke asked, echoing their conversation from that first desperate flight. "Only one," Evelyn said, turning in his arms. "I wish we'd had more than 3 days at the beginning. I would have liked to fall in love with you slowly, without death hanging over us." "We've got time now," he pointed out. "All the time in the world." "Then let's use it well." As darkness fell over their new town, they prepared for whatever came next. They'd been tested by fire, shaped by necessity, bonded by choice. The judge's daughter who'd chosen the condemned man had become something neither could have imagined, not just survivors, but warriors for the justice the law had failed to provide. Tomorrow would bring challenges. There would always be Blackwoods and Briggs, always be those who used power to crush the powerless. But there would also be people like them, ready to stand in the gap, to choose courage over comfort. For tonight, though, there was just this, a new beginning, a room of their own, and the knowledge that whatever came, they would face it together. Outside their window, the town settled into sleep, unaware that its newest residents had come not seeking shelter, but offering it to others. The judge had forced her to marry a stranger. She'd chosen the outlaw who looked like sin on a saddle, and in doing so, had found not just love, but purpose. The story that began in a courtroom with an impossible choice had led here, to a place where they could choose freely, fight fairly, and build something lasting. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The morning sun painted the valley in shades of gold and green as Evelyn and Luke stood at the crossroads outside Cedar Falls, their new horses packed with the few possessions they'd kept. 6 months had passed since they'd arrived in the town as the Calhouns. 6 months of building a reputation, helping where they could, and preparing for this moment. "You're sure about leaving?" Luke asked, though he already knew the answer. "We've made a good start here. That's exactly why we need to go." Evelyn replied, adjusting her riding gloves, men's gloves now, practical and worn. "We've done what we can here. The widow Morrison has her land back. The sheriff's actually enforcing law instead of collecting bribes. And young Tom Bradley's on his way to college instead of prison. Cedar Falls doesn't need us anymore. But somewhere else does." She handed him a letter that had arrived the previous week. "A woman in Silver Ridge. Says her husband died under mysterious circumstances after refusing to sell their mine to the local copper baron. She's got 3 children and 30 days before foreclosure." Luke read it through, his jaw tightening. "Sounds familiar. Too familiar, which is why we're going." They mounted up, taking a last look at Cedar Falls. The town had sheltered them, given them space to discover who they were beyond their desperate beginning. But staying would mean growing comfortable, settling into routine. And there were too many others out there facing impossible choices, just as Evelyn had faced in that courthouse a lifetime ago. As they rode, Evelyn reflected on how much had changed. The woman who'd pointed at a condemned man in desperation had evolved into someone who actively sought out injustice to confront. The skills Luke had taught her shooting, tracking, reading people and situations had combined with her own intelligence and determination to create something formidable. "Remember our first night in that broken-down cabin?" she asked as they stopped to water the horses at a stream. "Every detail." Luke admitted. "You in your mother's dress, trying to make cornmeal mush, me wondering what kind of woman chooses a noose over safety. A desperate one, but also..." She paused, searching for words. One who knew, somehow, that conventional safety was its own kind of death, that marrying Josiah Pruitt would have killed my spirit as surely as Yuma would have broken my body. And marrying an outlaw set me free. She smiled at the irony. The judge thought he was punishing me. Instead, he gave me the greatest gift, a partner who understood that rules and righteousness aren't the same thing. They camped that night under stars so bright they seemed within reach. Luke had built a small fire, just enough for warmth and coffee, and they sat close together, planning their approach to Silver Ridge. "The Copper Baron will have men," Luke said, studying the map they'd acquired. "Probably owns the local law too." "Then we don't go through the law. We go around it." Evelyn traced a route with her finger. "What if I approach as a potential investor a widow with money looking for opportunities? While I'm getting close to him, you can..." "No." His voice was sharp. "We don't separate. Not anymore. What happened with Blackwood taught me that we're stronger together than apart. Then we go in as what we are, the Calhouns, mediators and problem solvers. Sometimes the direct approach is best. And if they're not interested in mediation..." Her smile was sharp in the firelight. "Then we solve problems more directly." 3 days later, they rode into Silver Ridge as the sun was setting. The town was bigger than Cedar Falls, wealthier from the copper mines that dotted the surrounding hills. But wealth hadn't brought virtue. They could see it in the way miners shuffled past with bent backs. In the company store, prices posted bold as theft. In the mansion on the hill that overlooked it all, like a spider in its web. They found lodging at a boarding house run by a German woman who asked no questions beyond whether they could pay in advance. Over dinner in the common room, they listened to the talk of the town. "Another accident at the number 3 shaft," one miner muttered. "That's 4 this month." "Accident," another scoffed. "Holbrook won't pay for proper timber. Says it cuts into profits." "Hush," the first warned, glancing around. "You know he's got ears everywhere." Marcus Holbrook, the copper baron whose tentacles wrapped around everything in Silver Ridge, the same man who wanted the Morrison mine. That night, Evelyn wrote in the journal she'd started keeping, "We came here to help one woman, but I see a town that needs liberation. Luke warns against taking on too much, but how can we help Mrs. Morrison while leaving others to suffer? Justice isn't selective. Either we stand against all oppression or we're just playing at heroism." The next morning, they visited Sarah Morrison. She lived in a small house on the edge of town, laundry hanging on lines, children's voices carrying from inside. When she opened the door, Evelyn saw her own past reflected a woman trying to maintain dignity while the world conspired to strip it away. Mrs. Morrison, I'm Evelyn Calhoun. This is my husband, James. We received your letter. Sarah's eyes widened with hope and fear. I didn't think anyone would come. I've written to so many lawyers, newspapers, even the territorial governor. No one wants to cross Marcus Holbrook. We're not no one, Luke said quietly. Tell us what happened. Over tea that tasted of poverty, weak and reused, Sarah told their story. Her husband Daniel had discovered a rich vein of copper, had filed all the proper claims, done everything legally. Then Holbrook had come calling with an offer that was really a threat. When Daniel refused, he died in a cave-in that left no witnesses. The sheriff said it was an accident, Sarah said bitterly. But Daniel knew those tunnels like his own hands, and the timber supports, they'd been cut. I saw the marks. Do you have proof? Evelyn asked gently. Just my word against Holbrook's money. The foreclosure notice came the next week. Seems Daniel had taken a loan we knew nothing about, with terms we never agreed to. She looked at her hands. 30 days to pay or lose everything. That was 20 days ago. Luke exchanged a look with Evelyn. Forged documents, murdered opposition, corrupt law. It was Blackwood and Briggs all over again, just with different names. We'll help, Evelyn said firmly. But we'll need your trust and cooperation. What we do, it's not always strictly legal. Neither is what they did to my Daniel, Sarah replied. I'll do whatever it takes to keep this home for my children. They spent the next days gathering information. Luke visited the saloons where miners drank away their sorrows, listening to stories of accidents that weren't, of men who spoke up and disappeared, of a town held hostage by copper and greed. Evelyn, playing the part of a potential investor, gained entry to Holbrook's circle, enduring his pompous lectures about progress and profit while memorizing every detail of his operation. He keeps records, she told Luke one night. Detailed ones. He's so confident in his power, he doesn't even hide his crimes properly. The safe in his study, I saw him open it. The combination is his daughter's birthday. How do you know that? Because he told me, bragged about his daughter at finishing school back east, mentioned she was born on the 4th of July, a real American princess. Her voice carried disgust. He's built her privilege on the bones of dead miners. So we take the records, expose him. More than that, Sarah needs money to keep her home. Holbrook has plenty he's stolen. Seems fair to steal some back. Luke smiled, the expression transforming his scarred face. Now you're thinking like an outlaw. I had a good teacher. The plan came together like a dance they'd rehearsed, while Holbrook hosted a party celebrating another profitable quarter. Evelyn attended as a guest, keeping him occupied with questions about investment opportunities. Luke, dressed as a servant, moved through the house invisible to people who never really saw the help. The safe opened easily July 4th, just as Evelyn had said. Inside, along with cash and bonds, were the records of Holbrook's empire. Every bribe, every accident, every forged document. Enough to hang him 10 times over if justice meant anything in Silver Ridge. But Luke had learned from their encounter with Blackwood. Evidence was only powerful if someone with authority would act on it. So he took something else enough cash to pay off Sarah Morrison's loan 3 times over, plus a little extra for every miner's widow in town. They met at the boarding house, Luke carrying a satchel that meant salvation for Sarah and her children. It's done, Evelyn asked. Done, though Holbrook's going to have an interesting morning when he finds his safe empty. Good. Let him know how it feels to lose something precious. They delivered the money to Sarah that night, watching her tears of relief and joy. But Evelyn wasn't finished. The next morning, copies of Holbrook's most damning records appeared nailed to doors throughout town: the assay office, the sheriff's station, the church, the newspaper. By noon, A crowd had gathered outside Holbrook's mansion. "We should go," Luke urged, watching from their window as miners marched with righteous fury. "This is about to explode." "One more thing," Evelyn said. She'd written a letter, signing it with a name that was becoming legend in certain circles, the judge's daughter. It read, "Mr. Holbrook, you have built your fortune on theft and murder, hiding behind the law while perverting justice. The evidence of your crimes is now public. The money you stole has been returned to those you robbed. You have the same choice I once faced: flee or face the consequences. Unlike you, I show mercy. You have 24 hours. Choose wisely." She had it delivered by a street child. Then she and Luke packed their few belongings. Their work in Silver Ridge was done. Sarah Morrison would keep her home. The miners had evidence to demand real law. And Holbrook would either run or hang. As they rode out of town, they could hear the commotion behind them: shouts, breaking glass, the sound of a powerful man's world crumbling. "Where to now?" Luke asked. Evelyn pulled out another letter, one of dozens that had started arriving once word spread about their work. A farming community near the border, their waters being stolen by a rancher who claims prior rights. The people are dying of thirst while he waters decorative gardens. "Sounds like our kind of problem." They rode in comfortable silence. Two people who'd found purpose in each other and in the work they did. The desperate choice in a courthouse had led to this: not just survival, but a life of meaning. They were no longer running from injustice, but riding toward it, ready to stand between the powerful and the powerless. As the sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of fire, Evelyn thought about the woman she'd been and the woman she'd become. The judge had forced her to marry a stranger. She'd chosen the outlaw who looked like sin on a saddle, and in that choice had discovered her true self. "No regrets?" Luke asked, their old question given new meaning by all they'd experienced. "None," she said firmly. "Except maybe that Blackwood will never know he gave me the greatest gift of my life." "What's that?" "You, and through you, the courage to become who I was meant to be." They rode on into the gathering darkness, toward new towns, new injustices, new chances to prove that sometimes the greatest act of love is the refusal to let the world break you or those around you. The judge's daughter and her outlaw husband had become something more than either could have imagined: symbols of hope for the hopeless, proof that power could be challenged, and evidence that love could indeed conquer all, just not in the way the stories usually told it. Behind them, Silver Ridge erupted in long overdue revolution. Ahead lay endless roads and countless people who needed what they offered: not charity, but justice; not pity, but partnership in fighting back. They rode toward it all, fearless and free, bound by choice and strengthened by purpose. The forced marriage had become a true partnership. The desperate escape had become a mission, and two broken people had healed each other while learning to heal the world around them. The stars came out, bright as promises in the desert sky. Somewhere, a coyote called to its mate. The horses moved steadily onward, carrying their riders toward whatever tomorrow would bring. It was enough. It was everything. It was just the beginning. Thank you all for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed following Evelyn and Luke on their journey from a forced marriage to finding true love and purpose. Please let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to connect and hear your thoughts about this Wild West tale. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to my channel Wild West Night, like this video, and hit that hype button to help more people discover these frontier tales of love, courage, and redemption. Until next time, partners.